So my job here is just to keep you talking, but I want to say, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, since it just came out today, it is such a beautiful, honest, moving book that is actually much more about America in the last, how old are you, 85? In the last, in America in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now. I mean, you've truly lived each of those decades as iconically and fully. And so I want to go through that, but I thought maybe start with just where you grew up. You grew up in a Detroit that doesn't exist anymore. Can you talk about where you were as a kid?
Sure. Detroit, from the Detroit of my youth, was exciting, dynamic, vibrant city where all things were possible. If you wanted it built, we could build it in Detroit. And I was proud of the fact that we made, 57 Chevy Coupes in Detroit. They were beautiful works of art and exquisitely engineered, and they looked sexy, and they had big motors, and everything was possible. Work is, I think, the glue that holds communities together, families together, heads together, and Detroit had it. We had, the big three automakers and all the thousands of little machine shops around the city that machinists and tool and die people worked in, and it was rocking. I mean, it was actually a ball. I was like the Converse sneaker wearing, all-American bicycle riding, sandlot baseball. I was that kid. Life magazine. The Norman Rockwell vision of America was kind of what on some level, that's what it was like. And certainly in the 50s, where I lived on Michigan Avenue was full of retail. The blocks we lived on, Michigan Avenue is a major thoroughfare in Detroit, and all retail, clothing shops, furniture, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, movie houses, all thriving. Today, these blocks are mostly flattened. There's nothing there, and the businesses are all boarded up, and it's like a ghost town. It's like American Pompeii. It's a city full of buildings and no people. It's Katrina level destruction today. But then it was something, and it stayed dynamic through the 60s. I think it didn't start fraying at the edges and starting to show wear and tear till the mid 70s, I think. But, even though the die was set, OPEC had decided to charge more for oil, and Detroit got stuck with these gas guzzlers that no one could afford to drive anymore. The Germans and the Koreans all had better ideas about cars, and the city was doomed. It was doomed. I mean, in the end, it's like the worst that capitalism, the good side of capitalism is it produced these great cars and great livings for the workers and the unions, and then just took it all away. They took their money and they left town, and you end up with the entire industrial Midwest ended up suffering from this kind of pillaging that the big three perpetrated.
And the contrast in the book between this lively, exciting city where, you can, it seems like you're just constantly finding opportunities, musicians.
Absolutely.
And then the struggle and at times horror inside the home. And I think it reminds me of other memoirs. The character of your father, who's most notable for his absence,
Yeah.
that it's interesting how later you see yourself as this radical thinking that the problem is the world and the man, and then only when you're much older you realize, why the hell didn't my dad stick around? It's very powerful.
Yeah, this stuff takes a while to sort out. I think that we know more about child rearing today, and we know really the effects of childhood trauma. I work in the prisons these days, in our work in jail guitar doors, and I don't think I've met a prisoner who did not suffer childhood trauma. We know that things that happen to children affect them for their whole lives. And in my case, the idea that there wasn't a man in the house to model what being a man meant. How does a man handle disappointment? How does a man get up and go to work every day? How does a man love his wife or his children? How does a man act with other men? I don't know. All I knew is something was missing, and I stumbled on an answer, a temporary fix that was, if I stand in front of 1,000 people with an electric guitar and jump up and down, they'll shower me with affection. Oh, this works. This is pretty good. It seemed to work for a little while anyway. So yeah, the inside stuff and the outside stuff, the anger that I felt because my father was gone, I transferred over to, it fed my defiance and my cynicism with the government and the police and what was an angry little boy became an angry young man.
And I want to get to music quickly, but the one thought I kept having, because I'm reading this book in 2018, is, if you told me today there's a young guy, a young white guy, grew up in a blue-collar family, broken family in Michigan, doesn't really know that he has career prospects, I would instantly start thinking, oh, he's a Trump supporter, he's an alt-right guy. And you were the very opposite of that. I mean, you were a radical, you were a White Panthers, a brother, an ally to the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Why was it the time that was different? Was it you that's different? Why did the radical moment that you came up in have such a different valence than today's radical moment for men like you, young men like you?
My sense is that in my generation, there's a few people around here that are my age, that there was an agreement amongst all young people. We were young once, and the agreement was that the older generation had messed everything up royally, that the hypocrisy and the corruption and the just venality, if that's a word, is venality? The venal nature of American politics was so foul that we had to do something about it. We had to take action, that we militantly opposed what they represented. And this was an agreement that we all shared. If it was me growing up in Detroit, or some kid growing up in San Francisco who wore his hair long, or a kid in London, or students in Paris, or students in Mexico City that are taking over their universities. This was the agreement. It was us against them. And there was no alt-right. There was them and there was us. There was kind of two teams, the older generation and young people. So it was clear where the line in the sand was. Today, everything is much more diffuse and balkanized. This group is over here and that group is over there, and there doesn't seem to be much agreement. There's in-group agreement. Everybody in one group agrees with each other, that kind of confirmation bias idea. But generally speaking, we're in a pretty fractured state, in my humble opinion.
But do you feel empathy when you read about these angry young men who are lost, maybe but I wonder if you're able to see them maybe in a way that.
Sure, of course. I mean, seems like half of those Trump supporters were Bernie Sanders supporters, because Bernie found a voice for their frustration. He found a way to express their frustration with the same things, corruption and the swamp, all that stuff upset everyone, and so Bernie, got played out of pocket, and Trump was smart enough to go in and scoop all those people. I mean, look at how many Obama voters voted for Trump. There is a genuine dissatisfaction, a disillusionment in the electorate. The American people they're sick of what goes on in Washington, and how could you blame them? I mean, the Democrats have a role to play in it too. I mean, for the last 30 years, nothing has been accomplished. Civilization building stopped about 30 years ago, and we keep spinning our tails and spinning our wheels, chasing our tails, going around with, culture wars and piss Christ and gay people and let's get moving here, like the time's a waste and the sky's broke, We got real problems.
So let's talk about music. I assume a lot of people here are eager to hear about the music. I mean, one thing that's really fun about the book is, I think, especially for someone my age, I guess MC5 still existed when I was a baby, but I didn't know about it. That you're thought of so much as like, oh, he influenced punk, he influenced this sound, that it's hard to even imagine that there was a time when you were just trying to figure stuff out. You didn't have some plan. You weren't like, I'm 14, but in 15 years there's going to be this movement that I'm going to influence. And it's really fun reading your just like voracious appetite for music and just the influences that you were finding, and which start off very traditional, like rock and roll of the moment, and then kind of go nuts. So can you talk about what your music life was as you? I mean, it seems like by 14 you're like a serious guitarist. You're playing all the time.
Well, yeah. I discovered the guitar around age 10, and my mom got me a guitar teacher. This guy would come over and give me lessons, learn the rudiments of how to tune the guitar and how to start to play melodies. And he wanted me to learn how to sight read and count out time. And I was way too impatient for that. I wanted to play like Chuck Berry, this week, and, not 3 years from now. And actually, my teacher couldn't play like Chuck Berry either, so he couldn't show me how to do it. But I saw a power in music. I saw it in my living room when this guy that my mother was dating would come over and play his guitar and sing some songs. And I didn't like this guy. I didn't like him. But my mother was going for it. And I said, what? That's interesting, And she'd be all, I think this guy's a jerk, Yeah, okay, he can sing and play the guitar, but and then Elvis was blowing up then, and here's this guy with the weird name Elvis. I'd never heard of anybody named Elvis, and here growing up in Detroit, I didn't know any people named Elvis, but this kid Elvis had this incredible voice, and this incredible stage presence where he would just oozed personality, and he was sexy, and in a way that I didn't really even know what sexy was. I just knew, wow, that's like super cool. Like, how does he know how to do that? And when he just, and everybody screams, like, wow, that's incredible. So I knew that and then my fascination with the sound of music, the tone of an electric guitar, as opposed to an acoustic guitar, but the electric guitar, that was the sound of the amplifier. I was just drawn into it. It was like it was speaking to me in an ancient tongue, and I did attack the guitar. I mean, it became my obsession and my refuge. I mean, I would sit in my room and play for hours and hours. I think I tell the story about my dog getting run over, and I could take my guitar in my bedroom and play my guitar and be sad. Yeah. My dog got ran over.
Ben-Hur.
That's what you do. You play your guitar, and I had a way to express my feelings, and I wanted to be a better guitar player and a better musician, and I kept up with lessons, and then I started to learn that I could learn more from other guitar players. And I started, musicians are generally incredibly generous with their abilities and their skills and their talents. And if one musician asks another musician to show me how to do that, we're all happy to show somebody, yeah, man, you do that like this, because we want to show off, And yeah, here, you do it. No, put your finger over here. Okay, yeah, like that. Okay, you got it. And so I started to learn that way, and then it became clear that I wanted to play in bands. At one point, I stopped seeing myself as a solo Elvis type performer, and I saw myself as the member of a band. I liked the Ventures and early instrumental rock groups, and I liked the Beach Boys, and I liked the gang idea. And of course, when the British first wave hit America, I was swept up in it, just like most kids. And this band, the Beatles, had this incredible connection with each other. You could see it when they were playing, like they'd be playing, and they just kind of glance at each other. I think, man. Like they really know each other. They really understand what each other is doing. They're feeling each other. It was very powerful for me. And
you talk about a moment of seeing some guys jamming, and you couldn't figure out how they knew how to just move from one song to the other without talking to each other.
Yeah, so much of it was a mystery. How a soloist could invent a melody right on the spot that he hadn't played before. How in the heck do you do that? And I'd listen to jazz. I started buying a Columbia Record Club. You could order records, and they would send them to you, and you didn't have to pay for them. So I'd order all these records, and I'd get jazz guitar, Jim Hall jazz, and I'd listen. I'd have my guitar, and I'd listen to him play the guitar. I'd say, his guitar has more notes on it than mine. I can't find those notes. And I'm still looking, it's the thing about music is you never master your instrument. You never master music. I mean, people can get a degree and they can be a master, but music has the ability to be reinvented infinitely.
And that seems to be, if we were going to say what your aesthetic was, it's not so much like I want to perfect this sound. It's more just you want to continually explore how different people are playing music, how you can respond to that. Getting really into free jazz, was that something a lot of other rock and rollers were doing?
No. Part of it was I wanted to do this as a vocation. I wanted to do this as my job. I saw in music a chance to get out of Detroit, to not end up on the line at Ford's. That maybe there was a bigger world I could participate in, and maybe I could be like my heroes and and write my own songs and go on tour and travel around the world and have girls scream over me.
And that did happen.
And it did happen, a lot of it, especially the sexual part of it, I've had to look at hard. Like the things that happened to me. I had a abusive sex experience with my stepfather, and I lost my virginity at 10 years of age. And I look at 10-year-old boys today, and I think that's child abuse. And I wondered, did those experiences imprint on my brain? Was my callous promiscuity, the quantity of random sex that I had as a rock musician, where did that come from? That's not normal. That's not average. What drove me to do that? I mean, we laugh about it, rock stars and groupies, but it's not really funny. This is aberrated behavior. This is damaging behavior. This damaged me, and it certainly damaged all those young women that made themselves available backstage. So some of this stuff, there were elements that were forces in play that were bigger than I could realize, and I only know these things with the advantage of being 70 years old and having written a book about it, and years of therapy and talk and looking inward to try to make sense of try to understand who the hell I am. I mean, and what's wrong with me, and so to put all this stuff together and try to be a musician professionally. A part of it was, to have a sound, to have a voice, to have my own voice. And the things I was able to do with the guitar and with the MC5, I wanted to go further. And I think that was, that's part of just being young and ambitious and hungry for the experience of being alive. And what I found in like free jazz, in the music of Pharoah Sanders and Albert Ayler and Sun Ra and Train, Cecil Taylor, was the next step. These guys were all a little older than me. They were certainly better trained musicians than me, and they had ideas that were more stretched out than I had, and that's where I wanted to go. So that was kind of the door that opened up to, there's new ways to play music, there's new ways to have a lifestyle, there's new ways to do politics, there's new ways to have relationships. And, some are skewed and some were pretty good, and life is messy.
I mean, it is the kind of rock and roll star section of the book. There's these brief flashes where you really can feel a true joy, like when you're on stage and everything's working. You talk about playing with the band where you're not even fully aware. Did I play those notes? Did they? It's you're just part of this entity, and it's like these flashes that almost instantly are yanked away. That there's how do you experience it now when you look back at those times? Is it like can you what was the when I say like what was the most fun? What was just amazing of those times? What do you think?
Yeah. The camaraderie and mutual respect of the people I worked with was the most fun. To be part of something, something that mattered, that had value, not only in our world, but we thought value in the larger world, that we could have a role to play in change and try to explore what the possibilities might be for a rock band or a house full of hippies or a bunch of freaks. You know, getting to play and the sound of the instruments is a huge motivation. It still is today. I love the sound of, like, when the band is, when it's all working, there's actually nothing better. I have had nights where they're perfect nights. I mean, everything that's going on is imperfect, but that's when it's the best. And it doesn't get any better. They're absolutely magical experiences. And those make it worth it. Those are extraordinary. I mean, the trick is to grab a kiss from joy as it passes by.
Because the Wayne of then, can I say it, was kind of an idiot at identifying what was giving serious satisfaction and what wasn't. And just because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure we get through, because there's a really powerful story. I don't want us to get so much detail that people don't buy the book and read it, but so we want to leave them wanting more. But so, because one of the very powerful things in the book is the sort of effortless slide into being a junkie, where you yourself seem to be kind of the last one to realize that you have made that slide, and sort of the ability to fool yourself into thinking you're still doing that other thing. You're still being a great musician.
I still got everything under control. Right. Yeah, denial is not just a river in Egypt. You're right. Well, you know, it dovetails with the breakup of the MC5, because I lost everything that I worked for from the time I was a boy. I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be a professional musician. I did that. I made a band. I was a professional. I had made albums. I had toured the world. I had worked really hard. And then one day, it all went away. And it was all gone. And this is not unique to me and the MC5. Almost all bands go through this. It's a natural cycle of life and atrophy. And of course, the MC5 had a little rougher road, because we had trouble with the FBI and the Justice Department and the Detroit Police Department, and we were attacked on the inside from our own comrades on the left, and so it was more severe. And so I came out of that suffering a great loss. And there are powders and potions and pills available in the world that are designed to kill pain, and I helped myself to them because I had enormous pain. The pain was so big, I didn't even know I had that big of a pain. And I found vodka and heroin to be a great painkiller. My trouble, when I got sober in the beginning, I thought my trouble was that I liked to get too high. But drugs and alcohol were not my problem. My problem was I couldn't get along with people. I couldn't get along in the world. You upset me. You bother me. Everybody bothers me. The police bother me. Priests bother me. My wife bothers me. The mailman bothers me. The weather bothers me. And nobody does things the way I want them to do them. And I get upset, and I get relief when I get loaded.
So it was a solution.
It's a solution.
The book is very pro-heroin. I should just warn you.
The trouble is that heroin has side effects. If a bottle of vodka for breakfast has side effects. And for me, those side effects were hepatitis C, prison, homelessness, poverty, degradation, the gutter. That was my side effect, that I ended up on a trip, a one-way ticket to the gutter. And I stayed there for a long time.
Thinking the whole while,
thinking
this
all the
great
while,
musician, I'm just a week away from...
I would shoot dope on the Lower East Side and here in this city in the 1980s and say, what's wrong with those record company executives up in Midtown? They don't know that I'm the genius that invented the MC5. I'm the architect of the MC5. What's wrong with them? I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Couldn't see that there was something wrong with me, something profoundly wrong with me.
and by the way, we kind of walked over the political stuff, which is incredible. I mean, the kind of weirdly, the role you played in Watergate. And,
Yeah.
but let's make that something they have to buy the book for, okay?
Good.
All right. So you and I have been friends for a few years.
Yeah.
And I've known, I think that whole time that you had been in prison. I had in my head that you were railroaded somehow. You were not. You really earned that.
I asked
Frankly,
them.
you got off easy.
I got off easy. You know, there are, and really, I mean, it's in all seriousness, there are people serving life without the possibility of parole for the same offense I committed. I mean, it's not a joke.
And you committed crimes. Statute of limitations is long past, but where you didn't get caught.
Yeah, listen, I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of. You know, I hurt people, and I've been hurt. And, you know, yeah, I asked to be locked up. I did everything possible to lock me up. I was a complete amateur gangster. As a gangster, I'm one great guitar player. I didn't learn how to be a gangster till I went to prison. I mean, they taught me how to deal drugs in prison. And they taught me how to deal with those kinds of issues in prison. I mean, that's what prison is. Prison is crime school. You know, if you don't know how to do crime before you go to prison, you'll learn while you're there. So yeah, I asked for it. I waited all my life to fuck up that bad.
Yeah. And what is that to be, to have touched the heights, you know, to have played for Jimi Hendrix, to have, and then to be doing home invasions, to you know, being in prison. Like what, how were you experiencing that at the time? Was it the same, like, oh, those idiots, everybody screwed me?
No, prison, they give you time to think. And I had time to really go back over my history and try to see, you know, how did I end up here? You know, what happened? And finally to conclude that, you know, I am the architect of all my own misfortune as well. And I think we all are. I think we you know, we program ourselves to say, you know, oh, isn't that just like me? I always mess that up. Oh, I always miss that deadline. I always miss my deadlines. You know, well, if I keep telling myself that, I will be creative towards that end. And I think that's what happened to me. And you know, I was devastated. I was destroyed. Going to prison I wouldn't wish it on. Well, I might wish it on some people, but there's one in particular, a developer that orange-complected developer that I think could use with the prison experience.
Leave Bob LaFrac out of it. He didn't do anything to you.
But yeah, it's you know, you're never safe. You're forced to live in a world with truly dangerous people, not people that just tell you dangerous stories. People who do dangerous things, damaged people. And, you know, all those big, tough prison guards that you see on TV, they're not there to make you safe. They're there to make each other safe. They don't give a damn about you. I think anybody that does a term probably ends up with some degree of PTSD. It's just too hard to live in those institutions day in, day out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, like we do to people today. Without doing phenomenal damage to the psyche and the spirit and the soul of human beings, which they are. They're all humans, just like you and me.
Although what's amazing is that you talk about how you were there at the end of when people actually took seriously reform.
Yeah.
And that there were real programs, there was a real investment, in addition to all the horrible stuff.
Yeah,
and that is, because as you know, my cousin just got out of prison, and they have things they call programs. They don't nobody's seriously thinking about reforming people anymore. And I think that ended soon after you got out.
It did. They told us, word came down from Washington that the era of rehabilitation was over, and this was going to be accountability from here on. And that's when the drug war ratcheted up, and we started locking up people at 7 times the rate that we had previously. And through from the 40s to the 70s, crime rates and prison populations were stable. And then in the 1970s, they rocketed up to, I mean, when I went to prison, there were 350,000 people in prison in all of America, state and federal. And today, there's 2.3 million of our fellows under lock and key.
I'm forgetting the name of the jazz musician who you
Red
got-
Rodney.
Red Rodney.
Yeah.
And that is such a beautiful section of the book, how you find this, not just a friend, but a real mentor. I mean, there's a theme throughout the book. You're always finding mentors. You're finding, I guess, dads.
Dads, absolutely. I spent the first half of my life looking for father figures. You know, Rob Tyner was a father figure for me. John Sinclair was a father figure for me. Mick Farron became a father figure for me. By the time I had ended up in AA, my sponsor was the first man that was older than me, wiser, more experienced, that I did not experience as a father. Him I experienced as a brother. But yeah, I was on the desperate hunt for a father.
But talk about Red Rodney. I mean, I really love that section where you these kind of two lost souls, and you're just talking music and learning.
For those of you that don't know about Red Rodney was a jazz trumpeter who replaced Miles Davis in the Charlie Parker Quintet. Red was from the same school of trumpet playing that Dizzy Gillespie was from. Played with tremendous velocity and technical ability that surpassed trumpeters today. I don't hear trumpeters today that can play as well as Red played. Red was vivid, exciting musician. When he played, I didn't hear chords and melodies. I smelled fried chicken. I smelled greasy fatback and restaurants and New York streets, and he was a genius in the truest meaning of the word, and he was also a lifelong opiate abuser and the classic dope fiend jazz musician. And he came to Lexington after being kidnapped in Denmark by the United States government.
Story.
It's unbelievable. Shot and kidnapped in Denmark by DEA agents, brought back to America and sent to federal prison, where he ended up with me. And we developed a friendship. It was a little rocky in the beginning.
He made you play to figure out if you were worth talking to.
I went up to him. He drove out. He was in the lobby of the housing unit where the police have guards sit there, and as you come in, they check you out and check your ID and all that. And Red was standing there, and I said, "Hey, I'm Wayne Kramer, and you're Red Rodney. Welcome, and we have a band, and maybe we could do some playing together." And he went like, "Yeah, we'll see." I thought, what a dick, like I'm being humble and gracious, and he's being a snob. And but it's understandable, because prison is prison, and people are often not who they represent themselves to be. And one day I was in my cell, and he came up, and he had a jazz fake book and his horn under his arm, and he said, "Can you read these changes?" I looked, and I said, "Yeah, I can read those." And he said, "Okay, we're going to play this one." He leafed through. He said, "Yeah, let's play this one. All right, get ready. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3." And he started playing the melody, and I'm because it's bebop, and sometimes there's 4 chords in a bar. Each beat has a different chord, and I'm and I'm sure I butchered the song, but when we finished, he said, "Yeah, you can play. All right." And all of a sudden, he warmed up to me, and we developed this friendship, and I got to see what one possible future would be for me if I continued on the road I was on, because I was in my mid-20s. Red was in his mid-50s, and he was back in prison again for the third or fourth time in his life. And I thought, wow, man, I don't want to come back to these penitentiaries at 50 or 60 years old. And he told me true. He never lied to me. He never played me. You know, I asked him if he thought I was going to make it on the outside, like was I going to stay clean? And he said, your girlfriend, does she use? And I said, yeah, she uses. He said, you don't got a chance. I said, you don't have a chance. And he was right. I didn't have a chance. I mean, I got out and I'm not using, and I got to drive her to cop every day. And you know, I've been to the penitentiary now. This is a new, improved Wayne Kramer, the new sober. You know, I've got my act together. And finally, you know, she says, well, baby, I know you don't want to use right now, but you know, if you change your mind, the shit's really good. So I didn't have a chance.
Yeah, you didn't have a chance.
No.
And in a way, the next chapter is kind of the most heartbreaking. You're sort of lost for
Decades.
decades.
Couple of decades.
A couple
yeah.
of decades. I mean, you develop a craft of carpentry. Are you how often are you playing music? Is it?
Well, this is the 80s, and I lived here in New York, and you remember, those of you that were around in the 80s, there was a period where clubs like Danceteria and the Mud Club were thriving, and there were big crowds every weekend, and bands could work. I could get $1,000 a night to go play in these venues. And then the legislation changed where 18, 19, 20-year-olds could drink in their own communities, the Bridge and Tunnel crowd. And the bottom fell out of the club business, and shit got tight here in New York. Work slowed down, so you know, I got sick of being poor between gigs, and I took a job as a laborer on a construction site, and then finally zeroed in on, I kind of liked woodworking, and I found that I was good with my hands, and I could build things from a plan. I had spatial sense, and I had a sense of the procedure, you know, the sequence of events to build something. And I fell in with a really beautiful man, Frank Mattiello, who was a genius cabinet maker who trained me in the trade of fine woodworking, and became my woodworking mentor. And I worked for him for almost 10 years, and came out of it. You give me a plan, and I built a couple houses down in the Florida Keys, custom. Me and one other guy, we built 2 custom homes, and I'm still a carpenter, and I'm proud of being a carpenter. It's good work, you know. If this music thing doesn't work out, I still have my tools.
But you're using in relationships that, including a marriage, that aren't working
Disasters,
well.
yeah. I still had, you know, I was still just as tangled up as it was possible to be, you know, lying to myself. I mean, we talk about honesty, and, you know, it's one thing not to lie to you, but it's another thing for me to lie to me. And that's what I was doing. You know, for 10 years I lived here, I was just chasing my tail, going around and around, doing the same things. I mean, that's the definition of insanity. Do the same thing over and expect it to turn out different. Expecting you know, a career to flourish when I'm not doing anything to deserve a career flourishing. Nothing's getting written, nothing's getting read, you know, nothing's being accomplished because I'm wrapped up in a bottle of vodka and a bag of heroin.
And I want to rush to the end so people,
Sure.
And because we're going to then have time for a few questions, but there's so much that we are passing over. So read the book, buy the book. You know, I've only known you sober. I've only known you as a husband to a wonderful wife, Margaret, and a dad. So it's almost impossible to imagine that the man you were in that period of time became the man you are now. Can you talk a bit about also, I mean, the other thing is it's one of the most honest and non-cinematic sobriety tales. It's not, I mean, you did hit bottom at one point, but there's all these false starts. There's all these seeing what you could have and then saying, fuck it, I'm not going to go for it. Going to AA, seeing that it could heal you, and then getting drunk right afterwards. Like, do you have a date that you look back on as that's the...
I have a traditional 12-step sobriety date.
Here, hold on.
Sorry. I have a traditional 12-step sobriety date. And, you know, this year's 20 years without a illegal drug or a drink. And I mean, people ask me how long you've been sober, and my standard response is all day. Because that's how I was trained, and that's really how it's done, is a day at a time. But those days add up, and yeah, it's, you know, that guy that was the asshole, junkie, thief, rip-off artist, and this guy, the, you know, fine father and civic-minded individual, creative artist, they're the same guy. You know, these things are all come about through minor course adjustments. There's no big magic answer that one day I was a scumbag and the next day, ta-da, it's Wayne Kramer, good guy. It doesn't work that way. I didn't get to be a scumbag overnight. That was a piece by piece, you know, one more terrible experience, one more awful thing that I did, one more get too high, one more time. And it's the same way coming back, you know. Each aspect of what I like to think of as a whole person, you know, those are all a compilation of little adjustments. You know, a small adjustment, for example, started off small. In the 12 steps, there's a point in the learning how to apply the principles in those steps, where we start talking about character, defects of character and shortcomings. And they're not the same thing. Sometimes there's confusion. Defects of character are things that I do that I shouldn't do. Shortcomings are things that I don't do that I should be doing. And the treatment for shortcomings is to start doing the things that I should be doing. And they talk in the 12 steps about being of service. And this was a completely foreign concept to me. Even considering my political activism and that I still did not grasp what that meant, being of service. And it was explained to me that, you know, do something for somebody else for a change. Think about someone else first for a change. I mean, I thought about other people. Well, you could go first right after me. You'll be first right after me. That's how it works. Here's a line of cocaine. Of course, you can have the first one right after me. I always let people be first right after me. And everything I did worked that way. That's how I lived my life. But so I had a neighbor. I lived in West Hollywood. I had a little studio, and I was starting to write music for film and TV. And I had this neighbor. He was an elderly man. He was 95, Lou Mitchell. And Lou was the best. I just adored this old guy. And he would be standing out in front of the building and waiting for a cab. Because every Thursday he went over to the Roxbury Park where they had his go-go step group, where all the old folks got together and a band would come and play, and they'd have a sandwich, or they'd have a speaker who would come and talk. And it was a way for them to be social. So I'd see Lou, he said, oh yes, you can't depend on these cabs, and I have these bus tickets, but I said, Lou, I work at home, you know, I have a car, I'll drive you on Thursdays. And it was that simple. I learned at the meeting, they told me, do something for somebody else. I said, well, I could do this for this old guy, you know, all right, let's try it. And so for the next 3 years, on Thursday, I drove Lou to his meeting and developed the most wonderful relationship with this guy. I adored him, and I started to meet the people in his group. And, you know, I'd say, come and have lunch with Wayne. I got you a chicken salad. It's chicken salad. Wow, fantastic, Lou. Let's get that chicken salad. And listen to the speakers and just participate in his life. And he, you know, he's 95. He knows a little bit about how the world works. He knows a little bit about people. He's 5 years old. And never really putting it together. And then of course, Lou died. And then I realized, wow, I had the great good fortune to be this guy's friend, and what a gift he was in my life. And this being of service thing really had value. And from that was really, you know, when I turned to who are my fellows, you know, to be of service to my fellows. Well, my fellows are that 2.3 million prisoners who I am those guys. Those guys are me, and I am. When I talk in prisons, I feel like this is the only audience that actually understands what I'm talking about. And so what could I do for them? Well, I was a musician on the outside. I was a musician on the inside. Maybe I could be a bridge between these two worlds. And I ran into, maybe I could play concerts in prisons. That was an idea. I ran into Billy Bragg. He told me this work he was doing in England, providing instruments for tools for prisoner rehabilitation. It's a great idea. Let's start that in this country. And we did. And so this concept of being service, you know, of doing something for somebody else, and prisoners in particular, for me, at first it became a great temporary distraction from my own meaninglessness, that I grapple with meaninglessness. You know, that in 900 million years the sun will burn out, and what will all this matter? And when I do something for somebody else, it helps rebuild the self-respect and the dignity that I lost on my trip to the gutter. That little by little, I feel like I'm earning a place back in the human race, that I can be a fellow amongst fellows, I can be a worker amongst workers, that I'm no better, but I'm no worse than anyone else. And that took some doing, because for a long time, I was, as far as I was concerned, way worse than everybody else.
Yeah, the scene where you describe playing for, then just sitting with these prisoners at Sing Sing is, I mean, that feels like the moment where it's really full circle. Like you have a happiness that comes through in the page.
Yeah, because what I thought was my worst low point, the most terrible, meaningless, wasted time of my life, became my greatest asset, became my greatest gift. Because I could talk to other men and say, I know how you feel. I did that too. I was where you are. I'm attempting to connect. The connection is the solution. Connection is where the medicine is. And you know, the connection tells me I'm not alone, and you're not alone either. That we're all in this together.
Great. Well, now we'll have time for a little bit of question, but I do want to make clear, as I think you made clear, like that, the journey of the book, you're with you at every one of those moments. So when you earn that moment, I mean, as the reader, you really do a masterful job of making me feel like I've earned that moment. You know,
you're very kind to say that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. That means extra coming from you.
I'll bring the mic around.
Hello. So I've just bought the book, so I'm going to read the whole thing looking forward to it. And by the way, speaking of books, I have a three-part real quick. Have you read, I assume you read the Grit, Noise, and Revolution book?
Yeah.
That seems like do you agree that that's excellent, an excellent piece of work for the what it is?
You know, I read them all when they first came out, and I kind of dismissed them all.
Okay. Well, at least somebody had great interest and put out a really large volume of work there about about the Motor City and all of the. But anyway, here's the two-part question that's just about you. Since I haven't read the book, I just went on Wikipedia to get some sort of remind myself of the history, because they always do a good job in like 10 minutes or less, you know. So the two things that jumped out at me. When I was once having a conversation with Leslie West, okay, and he was saying. Not a long conversation, but he was saying that if the young people would put more emphasis on vibrato, understand the beauty of it, understand what it's all about. And in Wikipedia, it said that you've always had, one of the things that you were able to bring is incredible vibrato, and sort of to mimic or emulate Albert Eiler and all these sort of sounds through vibrato. So you were probably one of the biggest protagonists of that art form. But Leslie is with you on the importance of it. But then on the flip side, I'm reading that when John Landau became your manager for a while, the group's manager, and produced back in the USA, it said that he sort of neutered the sound. He compressed it a lot and kind of left out the big, grand kind of bombast of it, leaving you all very frustrated and unhappy with it. If that's correct, and kind of like he made it too much in his own image, what he wanted, which a producer's not really supposed to do, as far as they're not supposed to leave their fingerprints all over it. They're just supposed to help, not make it their own. Is that fair? Because that must have been a lesson of what not to do with a producer. It must have left you very pissed off, or frustrated.
No.
No? Okay.
No, because Landau and I discussed this stuff. I mean, we ground the edges off it, We turned a square into a circle talking about this stuff. And my goal with that album was to prove our critics wrong. The critics that were so hard on the MC5, saying that, I couldn't tune my guitar, that we couldn't play. And that really, as a player, that got to me, and especially as a young guy who, was really committed to what I was trying to do. So Landau helped me try to do that, to make every song, the tempo's correct, the guitars were in tune, the melodies were correct. He was not an experienced record producer, and you could make arguments about the timbre of the instruments, that it could have used more bass, that we could have overdriven the drums, that we could have distorted the guitars even more. But I wouldn't fault him for that. I think, learning how to record is a complex business, and we had virtually no experience with it. That's why our first album was recorded live. Elektra knew that taking this band in the studio was going to cost a fortune, and they didn't want to spend that kind of money. We were good at playing live, so that's what they wanted to capture. We'd only made a couple singles, so we probably had 10 or 15 hours of experience in the studio when we started that album, and we were learning how to be creative in the recording studio environment. But I wouldn't fault Landau unnecessarily. I mean, he tried to help. His job was to help, and he did the best he could do.
I didn't realize you were in cahoots with that.
I was in cahoots, yes. It was. Well, I can't speak for the rest of them. I mean, I only know what I read, what they say in different interviews. I know that there was kind of a dissatisfaction with the timbre of the record, the sound of it. And I remember hearing some grumbles about fascist marching music and and other members of the band being less than thrilled with the process.
Okay, I think we'll go on to. Do you want to?
I've got one over here, and then I'll pop to the front.
Okay, over there and then here. Yep.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I saw one of your Johnny Thunders tribute shows, and it was awesome. And I was wondering, how you guys linked up and what you thought of the album and just your general.
Yeah, Johnny, I'd met him a couple times in the MC5 era, and then after the MC5 broke up, I heard he had started a band, and the band was called the New York Dolls. And I thought they were pretty awful, really. I mean, I liked that, they dressed up and they were flamboyant, but the music didn't really light a fire under me. And then when I got back from prison, I had a bass player that worked for me, was friends with a volume drug dealer. And the drug dealer was managing Johnny. And he said, Johnny wants you to come down and sit in with the Heartbreakers. They were playing in Detroit. And I was, I was fresh from prison. I wanted to get back out there and, let people know I'm back and available for gainful employment. And I went and sat in with them, and I knew that night that this was going to be a disaster, because we couldn't even talk before he had to go shoot up first. And I find myself in this dressing room with junkies and syringes, and and I think, this is where I was before I went to prison. I just did a full circle, and now I'm right back where I started, and I went and did it anyway. I joined a band with him anyway because of my grandiosity. I thought I could fix it. I thought, well, I just won't go so far this time. I'll get it under control this time. Well, the power of the music will overcome. And I'm lying to myself, because why do you think the mafia doesn't like junkies? You can't trust them. They won't do what they say they're going to do. And it was a disaster. I mean, all the work we put into the band just it was a mess.
Right here.
I'm guessing this might be your first book that you've written.
It is the first book I've written.
I'm curious about what that process was like, what you found challenging. What's your retrospective on the book writing process for you?
Writing was not that hard for me. I enjoy the process, and I've heard you write what you know. Well, I know my story, so that part of it was easy. Putting it in a sequence was a challenge, because memory is random access, and I don't remember something happening in the spring and something else happening in the fall of that year. It's all just in there. So I had to write essays or anecdotes or stories, and then put them on a corkboard on 3x5 cards and figure out what happened when. And the real work came in the edits, when I would get notes from my editors. I had this woman, Leslie Wells, edited my book. It was my main editor, and she is terrific and brutal. She threw away 3 chapters on her first pass. Just out, get rid of it. But Leslie, it's my good stuff. Out. And then my wife Margaret is an editor. She took a pass at it. My agent took a pass at it. My publisher took a pass at it. I had some friends look at it, other writers. And so to have people say, this part here, Wayne, you need to get into this. You need to go deeper on this. Sometimes that stuff was like, but I don't want to go deeper on that. But a memoir that isn't embarrassing is going to suck. I mean, you have to go there. You have to say the hard things. You have to tell the stories where you don't look so good, and you messed it all up, and it wasn't admirable, and it wasn't sexy, and it wasn't dynamic. It was dumb and stupid and shallow and small, and I mean, we all have all of this stuff in our humanity, and so to write a book that people would be interested in reading, I knew I had to go. If someone told me you better go through that again and come up with better ideas about what was going on then I did. So that was some of the hard stuff, yeah. Well, I started writing it about 6 or 7 years ago, but I only really did it full time in the last year, where I really, cleared out my schedule and said, I'm writing all week this week. I'm writing, and I like the process. I know Mary Carr wrote 3 or 4 memoirs. I thought maybe could I write another one? Maybe. I don't know.
I think we have time for two more. Her and him were waiting, so.
And Dick has a question. I want to get
Okay,
Dick's
sure.
question.
Okay. Hey, okay. I saw you at the Jefferson Jackson dinner in Des Moines, Iowa, for Bernie. Right?
Wow.
You were great. That was great. And so I was wondering if there was any, any politician that you can think of moving on in the future that you would play for at a rally ever again.
I play for plenty of them.
Yeah.
Any of them that are, of good conscience, that are right-minded, that are progressive, I would, of course, democracy is participatory, and it's not just a concept or a word, it's something to do. And if I don't like the way things are, I have to do something, which is more than a like on the internet. It means get up off my ass, go out, meet with some people, figure out a plan, go take some action, put some pressure on this legislator, organize. Yeah, of course, I will continue to do anything I can, sure. And then someone over here had a question?
Here, and
yes,
then,
sir.
yeah.
And then Richard.
Thanks for spending a rainy afternoon with us, Wayne. We're really grateful. So you talked about Mick Farron being a father figure, and then there's just, when the second record came out, and it seemed to be a really huge thing in England, and The Damned covered Looking at You, and Lemmy said, I want Motorhead to sound like the MC5, and then all these other bands just kind of took what you did and ran with it. Do you have any reflections on those characters like Lemmy or The Damned, or those bands who are still continuing to hold the torch for the kind of music that you laid the foundation for?
Well, sure. I mean, all these guys became my friends over the years. I've been going to Europe for 40 years to play, and I know a lot of people, and to have these guys hold my work in esteem is very meaningful to me. I mean, most of it. I read once that Stephen King said we all write for one person. He writes for his wife. If his wife likes it, then he can put the book out. And the MC5, we really played for other musicians first. I mean, it's just I was my nature. I'm a natural-born show-off, and I'm competitive, and I like what I do, and so the fact that other musicians always gave the MC5 props was always meaningful to me. It was always a kind of confirmation that the work we did mattered. I hold it personally, I hold it in great esteem that other musicians, when they want to connect the dots, that they include the MC5 in that. And Richard.
Wayne, I love you, baby. Welcome to my town.
Thanks, Richard.
I can't help it if I have a lot of testosterone. I guess I have more statements to make than questions because I know you fairly well because I sat in a bus with you guys for 3 weeks traveling around Europe, DKT MC5. I watched these guys in the back of a bus sitting there like this. Who were you listening to? Do you remember the jazz player you were listening to in the back?
Coltrane?
No.
Sun Ra?
One of them guys.
Yeah.
So it's one of them cats. So they're sitting there, the whole MC5 is sitting there, and I said, you know what? I saw the MC5 open at spring weekend for the Birds in New Paltz in '71. I saw the MC5 close for the Jay Giles band as they were coming up at the Rock Pile in Long Island. And I just said, I love them so much. I'm going to stand here for an hour, and I'm going to get into what the fucking MC5 are into. And I stood there for an hour, and I went like this, and I went, I still don't get it. I don't get jazz. There's a couple of guys that I get, but, Sun Ra, God bless them all. I kind of don't get it. Me and Wayne and the boys, we were up in Greece, and we went up to the Parthenon. Wayne, Wayne, I don't mean to embarrass you, but you're one of the smartest motherfuckers I ever met in my life. The whole rainbow, the whole 360. Because I'm walking up the Parthenon going, so what about the people that were here then? And then where's the cradle of civilization? Every question I asked him, the guy knew. It's like he read every book ever. And he knew every answer ever. And I was like, wow, I'm learning some shit here. So the thing about Wayne, beside me as a kid loving you as a musician, the thing is, in Wayne's recovery, if I might mention that, I was amazed. Wayne, the beautiful Margaret, and myself were out for dinner one night when we were on tour. And here comes the dinner. And it's like a piece of fish and some carbs and some veggies and, of course, dessert. Wayne left a little fish. Wayne left a little carb. Wayne left a little veggies. And Wayne had a couple of bites of dessert. And he left the rest of the dessert. And I said to myself, I'm a food addict. I love food. Like, I would have, like, just, boom, eaten the whole thing. But the word that Wayne taught me was application. And I don't know if that was a conscious thing you were doing that night, Wayne, but that was applying application. You'd be the greatest guitar player in the world in your living room. You got to apply it. You got to touch people. You got to go out in the world. No one's knocking on your door going, hey, what are you up to? What are you going to do? We need you. You got to go out there and say, you need me because look how fucking great I am. You know what I mean? And you're eating this food. And I know it doesn't sound like a big thing or an important thing, but it's a meaningful thing. It's a symbolic thing. It's applying everything to everything you do in your life. And if you apply that to food, for example, you're not going to be a fat slob. Wayne, I love you, brother. I love you.
Thanks, Rick.
And I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Wayne. Thanks for sharing
Thank you,
your
Adam.
life with us.
Thank you. Thank you all
Thank
so
you
much
both.
for coming.
Let's keep it going for Wayne and Adam.
We'll see you in September at Irving Plaza.